Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Connect conversation. My name is Matt Peterson, and I'm the Executive Director of NAGDA. Today, we'll be talking about research from our partners at MFS, who have been running a study for the past few years that I think provides some really important insights into how plan sponsors and participants are thinking about retirement. So joining me today to discuss the results is Jerry Savage. Jerry is a lead retirement strategist at MFS. Welcome, Jerry.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, good to see you again. So first, let's just start by talking about the research. Can you explain the study a little bit, what you did and how you designed it?
Sure. So we actually have three proprietary surveys that we run on an annual basis at MFS. The first one is called the Road to Better Outcomes, which is our participant-based survey. We have a second survey called Bridging Better Outcomes, which is our advisor-based survey. And then the one that we'll talk about today is called Building Better Outcomes, and that's our plan sponsor-based survey. So we like to say that surveying all three of these audiences really gives us that full perspective of the DC landscape. So we're about to come out with this 2026 MFS DC Plan Sponsor Survey. It's our third year doing it. It includes plans of all sizes, and this year it represents over 400 billion in retirement assets and nearly 1 million participants based on the plan sponsor respondents.
Okay, terrific. And there were a lot of really interesting insights in there. One of the main themes that you focused on your plan sponsor research was confidence. And so that's what we're going to be mainly talking about today is confidence from that group and maybe some differences in confidence with other groups. So can you talk about the 2026 survey and how plan sponsors felt as far as confidence of retirement for their participants?
Sure. Yeah, just like you noted, I mean, we typically have three key themes that we focus on. And, as much as we want to discuss the survey data itself, the point of doing that is to help us create actionable insights for our clients and prospects. So one of the key themes really across all three surveys is retirement confidence. So in 2026, the results are really interesting for plan sponsors this year. We find 33% of sponsors are very or extremely confident about their average participant being able to retire at the age that they want to. And then an additional 52% is somewhat confident. So if you think about that number, it's still a relatively low number, but as we'll get into, there are some reasons to be optimistic about this and as well as from other results from the survey.
And when you think about confidence in people's ability to retire, so do you think plan sponsors are thinking about it how are they thinking about that in the perspective of their workforce? When you think about, especially in the public sector, you take a state plan, there are a ton of different employee groups under the hood, right, of that one plan. So for your public clients, really, how are they thinking about that diversity among their employees?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? The way that we've framed it is asking specifically about confidence in your participants' ability to retire at the age that they want to. So it's not necessarily speaking to an exact dollar amount or anything scientific or overly technical. It's, do you think your participants are ultimately being set up for success, that they feel that they can successfully retire? And then one of the ways that we've done that this year is to think about it across a plan's total workforce. So we actually modified the way that we asked the question this year based on feedback from potentially missing some of the story by only asking about the average participant. So my answer from the last question was, only 33% of sponsors say the average participant is have confidence in that average participant. But we've done a lot of work on generational breakdowns as you think about who's in the workforce today. This year, we asked sponsors to reflect that level of confidence for each generation in their workforce. And it turns out that sponsors are most confident about their Gen X and baby boomer participants. So those numbers jump up dramatically to they have a 51% level of confidence in their Gen X constituents and 66% in baby boomers. So to me, this is a really exciting development. It shows that average is masking these higher levels of confidence. And specifically, as we think about those nearing retirement, this is the age group, right, approaching retirement. And so being confident in their ability to retire, I think is a really crucial development.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight because we often talk, I mean, it's hard to talk about anything other than kind of that median participant, right in the middle. How are they doing? But especially, I think that's a really fascinating way to frame it. If you feel good about the folks who are getting near retirement, that's probably a pretty good sign. I mean, your younger folks are going to face a lot more uncertainty, as you can imagine, especially in the public sector, I would say. It could be for your public sector clients, it could be somewhat a symptom of the changing nature of DB plans. Maybe
Mhm.
the DB is getting a little less generous for the younger folks, but I think in general, maybe it just kind of speaks to seeing how those folks closer to retirement are doing and feeling a little better about that because it's really in the near term.
Yeah, I think we're so quick to think about all the negative news and right, it makes a big splash to say like that plan sponsors aren't confident and to really drill down into some of this data and show actually maybe they're a little bit more confident than we think and specifically have a higher degree of confidence in those that are about to retire or are closer to retirement. So there are some things that are going well and we should celebrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of things that are going well, and I think we should talk about those things from time to time. So let's talk about a little bit about how that plan sponsor level of confidence compares to what you've seen with participants. So what are the differences there?
Yeah, this is another great question and an interesting way to highlight the disconnect between what sponsors think and maybe how their participants feel. So, as I mentioned in our participant survey, we ask similar questions about their confidence in being able to retire at the age that they want to retire. And then we look at this based on generation data. And basically, there are low levels of confidence by both sponsors and participants the younger you are. So only 30 to 35% of sponsors and Gen Z and millennial participants say that they are confident in their ability to retire. And I think this makes sense because they're still early in their retirement journey and they need time to adopt positive behaviors and build out their retirement savings. But we see a really big disconnect across Gen X and boomers. So I noted that this is where plan sponsors are the most confident, but it's actually where participants are not. So only 24% of Gen X participants are confident in their ability to retire versus 51% of sponsors about this corresponding cohort. And then it's even more pronounced for boomers at 37% for when you ask participants directly versus 66% of sponsors talking about their boomer constituents. So, I think the obvious question here is what can we do about this? And one of the takeaways from our perspective is to better understand the drivers of that lack of confidence.
Okay, so that's a really interesting insight, and you would think almost as you get closer to retirement, those those differences would actually go down, but you've found the opposite. So plan sponsors may be a little more confident, participants maybe a little less. So who's right? Who gets who's actually got their finger on the pulse there, or is it kind of a mix of perspectives?
I feel like I could give a consulting answer here of it depends, but I do actually think in some ways the question when you pose it to participants, it's very much sentiment driven. It's right. It's how are you feeling about this, and so maybe they're answering from that perspective and maybe tend to be a little bit more negative. So I guess I would give the upper hand here to plan sponsors because arguably they should be answering some of this data or some of this based on data that they know about their plans, right? They know their participation rates, they know their deferral rates, they know all the different investment options they're offering or the benefit structure in general. So I guess I would say that their degree of confidence should maybe be looked at more carefully than the participant answer.
Well, you're playing to the right audience. I think our members would like that answer. So you've been doing all of these surveys for a couple of years now, 3 years, I think. And so you are getting to the point where you're able to see some trend data. How are the trends moving over time? What are you seeing on those changes?
Yeah. So the plan sponsor survey is the one that we've been doing for the last 3 years. The participant one we've actually done for several more years than that. But on the plan sponsor side, I think it's really encouraging to see that this level of retirement confidence is increasing. If we go back to that average participant answer, it actually was a low of only 18% in last year's survey. So that's a pretty significant jump just from last year alone to go from 18% up to 33% this year.
Okay, so that is a really good sign. What do you think are some of the factors that are contributing to those changes?
Yeah, we ask this question as well. When they give us their answer, we then have a follow-up question of some of the factors contributing to that confidence or lack thereof, right? It's like gated for if you've answered yes, you get the set of questions. If you've answered you're not as confident, you get a different one. So for sponsors who say that they are confident in their participants' ability to retire, they are stressing things like they feel they have a strong rate of contributions, for example. They see strong participant engagement. They see strong usage of tools and services. Like all of those are contributing to their overall level of confidence. Um, on the other side of the spectrum here, for sponsors who say that they're not confident, they place a lot of emphasis on economic conditions. And then they highlight things potentially like the subpar rate of contributions or a lack of participant engagement. But the numbers are heavily driven by economic conditions. So it seems to speak to a bit more of like a short-term point of view, like what's happening in the moment, versus those that are more confident feel like they're taking a longer perspective.
It's interesting. So do you think they're over attributing on that a little bit, or is it just kind of, maybe focusing in a way that, maybe just differences in focus?
Yeah, I do think there's a little bit of a misplaced emphasis there, especially for those that are tying it to economic conditions specifically, because if you think of the nature of a retirement plan, it is supposed to be long-term in nature. We are, looking over a multi-year time frame. So, some years are not going to be as good as others, but if you have participants that have strong contribution rates that are, have age appropriate allocations, there are reasons to believe that their outcome should be sufficient in retirement.
Yeah. And one of the things I liked about your study was it talked a fair amount about competing financial priorities and the role that they play. And I think it's something that as NAGDA, we've tried to emphasize a little more, that especially in the public sector, it's not just the DC plan, but it's not just retirement. It goes beyond retirement. So what role do those play, and what did you see in the data when you asked about those competing priorities?
They play a really, really important role, and we are seeing this year over year. So in this year's response, 73% of plan sponsors tell us that they believe competing financial priorities have had either a major or moderate impact on their participants' ability to save for retirement. So having that perspective also ties in, obviously, to retirement confidence or lack of confidence. And as well as in our participant survey, even more participants feel this way. So 83% of participants tell us that financial obligations are getting in the way of saving for retirement. So it's critical here. We are hearing from both sponsors and participants an acknowledgement that participants have competing financial priorities.
Yeah, and I suppose that's not a surprise, right? That's I mean, we're all living that, right? To an extent, do you save money for later, or do you spend it now, or where do you put that next dollar?
Mhm.
But if you have plan sponsors kind of recognizing that is an issue, and participants recognizing that that's an issue, one thing that we haven't seen from the plans that I've talked to, we haven't seen a lot of adoption in any of the kind of innovations maybe that were designed to address some of those things. Like we don't see a lot of adoption of the Secure 2.0 student loan match. Government plans can't use emergency savings accounts, but we haven't heard of a lot of interest on those either. Some plans are very interested, but not really broadly. So why do you think there's a little bit of that disconnect there between the decisions that plan sponsors are making with their plan, and the recognition, which I think is should be fairly universal, that there are other things than retirement that people are having to focus on.
Very fair and valid point. I think one thing we have going for us is at least there's a level of awareness that's happening. I do feel this is new and something that could hopefully eventually create some part of a groundswell movement here, even if we don't necessarily see adoption of, by the way, optional provisions under Secure, because arguably, not that we're covering that today, but in other parts of our survey, we know that Secure 2.0 is continuing to take up a lot of time and mind share on the part of plan sponsors. So they're very busy with the not the compulsory portions of Secure 2.0. But I do think, again, that at least that there's an acknowledgement that people have competing financial priorities can have some positive momentum in the retirement space. I think it can have implications for how we communicate and potentially engage with participants, knowing that, okay, they only have a certain amount of dollars to put to work, and they probably need some help in understanding where the best place is to put that dollar. And some basic education around why it is important to defer into retirement savings, even while and especially while you're young, and it may not seem as important now, but it's more important than ever. So
Yeah,
I do think I do think there's a lot to take from that. But do I want to see more adoption of those optional provisions? Of course.
Yeah, no, a really good point. And I think this is something that, especially in the last few years, really has been more of a topic that our members have asked us about. Let's cover different areas and let's talk about things beyond just the DC plan. And we see the DC plan, especially through policy like Secure 2.0, kind of being that nexus for where a lot of these decisions are made, right? Obviously, that's a push from the 401k space where that's your primary financial benefit. But I think there's an advantage there for our members to, even if you're not adopting, and I think you're totally right. You could ask any of our members; those compulsory parts of Secure 2.0 are taking up a lot of their time, and maybe the optional ones come later. But even if you don't take those steps, just communicating about them is a really good part of the process.
Yeah.
So I want to ask one more question about the survey. So you've created a measurement of retirement confidence. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then what you've learned are some of the drivers for plan sponsor confidence and how we can think about those?
Yeah, we're really excited about this. I think I started to say this at the outset, is it's really great to have survey data, but like, what do you do with this information? How do you make it actionable? And so for the second year, we're reporting on this plan sponsor confidence grade that we're calling the MFS Workplace Retirement Readiness Indicator. If you want to like shorten it, you can think about it as the worry indicator.
Okay, that's pretty
Try
good.
to be cute about it. The grade itself is based on a subset of the survey questions that we ask in order to think about sponsors' views on their participants' ability to confidently retire. So the average grade for 2026 is a B. So one that is pretty measured improvement. Last year, the grade was a C plus. Again, this is the average sponsor. We find a wide range of grades depending on plan size as well as type of benefits offered. And then some of the examples of the questions we asked that went into this grading are the one that we keep talking about. How confident are you in your plan participants' ability to retire at the age that they want to? What impact do competing financial priorities have? What's the typical age that your workers retire? Does your primary DC plan offer participants access to an advisor? What actions have you taken in regards to your DC plan lineup? So, and that's an interesting one because it's not necessarily that you have to take action. It's more that you're evaluating your lineup seems to influence confidence, as well as, the obvious, how many people are eligible to participate in your plan, what's your average deferral rate, things like that. And I mentioned that we do see some variations here. By and large, and these are generalizations, but smaller plans tend to be less confident. The average small plan has a C plus grade, while a mega plan, those are plans with more than 5 billion in assets, tend to score a B or higher. Similarly, plans with broader benefits design tend to be more confident as well. So this is an interesting one for this audience because, in the DC only space, those plans typically have a score of a B minus, but those that offer both DB and DC tend to have a B grade. And then even more interesting, the ones that have an open DB plan score the best with a B plus. So the benefits design does play a really important role here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And has that helped the conversations with your clients to kind of quantify it in that way and help them think about maybe areas they could improve?
Yes and no. Definitely from the questions perspective. I mean, I don't think anyone's necessarily going to be changing their benefits design based on this grade and this question. It's more or less working within the construct that you have to think about, on the margin improvements.
Yeah, that's great. And we know that especially with our members that it's they don't have control over the general structure, but certainly within the plan and the plan design and the decisions they're making, they can influence. And so, any information helps. I'm sure this is going to be very helpful to them. And be on the lookout for the survey. We'll have it included when we send out this recording. So go check it out at the link at the bottom of the email that you got. But Jerry, I think that's all the time we have for today. This is a real pleasure. Thanks for joining us for another Connect conversation.
Thanks so much for having me, Matt. Enjoyed the conversation.